Rabbi Saroken. How are you?
I am good. I'm excited to dive into Torah or to jump into Torah with you today.
What do we got? What's on the docket?
So this week we are in the Torah portion of Vayera, and I feel like there are a few really sort of fascinating things. And truth be told, I feel like we could spend a lot of time talking about this Torah portion. So I just want to invite anyone who has access to Vayera, Vayera, to definitely have a read to sort of allow some of the other details that we won't get to percolate. But this Torah portion is actually really fascinating to me. I think you and I, on our way out last week, said that there were a bunch of interesting pieces. I almost feel like they're scenes, right? It takes you through a whole bunch of different episodes in this Torah portion. But the first one I'm going to say is we see Abraham, and he is sitting in the tent.
Right.
He's sitting in the tent, and he sees these people coming by. He's just had his circumcision, his bris, and he sees three men that are coming near him, and he goes and he greets them. And this is sort of one of those things that I feel like when you read Torah, it's like a small thing. If you were reading a regular novel, you would just keep turning the page and sort of see that as background. But as a Jewish reader, one of the things that we learn about this is that this moment is actually really important, and that those three guests are actually not sort of strange men that are walking by in the heat of the day, but they're actually angels that are sent from God. And we learn from within the way Abraham greets those men that are actually angels, about the way that we have to, the way that we can aspire and hopefully live in order to treat, the strangers with generosity and to extend what we call as like chassidim, or like chesed, like kindness,
right,
to others. So just sort of thinking about that as our first scene when Abraham is sitting out in the tent and sees those strangers. Is there anything about this scene that resonates or is like interesting to you?
Well, I mean, it's a two-way street, right? Because the tradition understands that the angels, whatever they are coming to do a chesed act, which is to visit Abraham in his recovery. So that's Bikor Cholim kind of thing, visiting the sick. But then there's the whole sort of switcheroo in there where Abraham, and particularly Sarah, really takes the brunt of it, becomes the person who is enacting the mitzvah hachnasat orchim, so welcoming visitors, and this sort of interplay between chesed on one hand and chesed on the other hand, and how those things maybe kind of work together mutually.
Yeah. I love that. It's funny when the kids were younger and we used to entertain, and we always host on Shabbat, but when we hosted on Shabbat, we actually used this story to teach them about how to welcome people into our homes.
Right.
Because Abraham really goes out of his way to like go out and meet them, to offer them food and drink and a place to rest, and to really take care of the people who are his guests.
Right.
And then even at the end, sort of after all of that, he makes sure to sort of not only, sort of say goodbye, but to like walk them out and, begin to their next destination.
Right. All of those elements. Yeah. All of those elements.
So let's talk for a minute about like what happens next. So Abraham goes out of his house and he's escorting the angels. And one of the things that we know about angels is that each angel has its own like one mission, right? Which I love. They're not multitaskers. They do one thing and they do it well. What wouldn't you give for that? Like, one thing.
It's not the rabbinate, that's for sure.
I know. So where two of the angels are going, actually, right? One of them is sent to sort of deliver the news that they're going to have a baby. Abraham and Sarah are going to, and the other ones are going to go to Sodom, because the Torah tells us that like God heard the cries of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, and we see all of a sudden Abraham, is sort of escorting them to Sodom, and God is trying to think, and we read about this, God is thinking out loud, like, should I tell Abraham or not what I'm about to do? Right. And so there's this like interesting moment where we see God sort of thinking out loud, should I tell Abraham? And then God decides to ultimately tell Abraham, and what God is about to do is destroy the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham like says to God pretty much like, oh wait, like hold up there, let's talk this through. You want to pick it up from there?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is kind of fascinating about that is it's sort of an illustration of the way that God is also trying to figure this all out. What is, we always think about like the Abraham Sarah side of things, like they're trying to, okay, we're going to be, the proto-Jews. What does that mean? What obligate? What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to, but meanwhile, God also, it's complicated. Like God's not quite sure what to do. So in God's mind, to sort of shift into anthropomorphism for a moment, God's sort of saying, well, so if I'm going to be in relationship with this person, this family, and this important thing is going to happen, maybe I should share it with them. I don't know. Like it seems like God's like, I don't know. And then God says like, I will. And then the whole, very famous passage ensues, Abraham kind of arguing and
pushing back, if you will.
Yeah, but I also think at the end of that argument, I think God has made a decision that's I'm not doing that again. That didn't work out well. It was a hassle, like that, and so that's enough of that.
Oh, that's so interesting. So you think that God telling Abraham in advance God's plan to basically destroy these two communities, and then Abraham sort of like pushing back and being like, hey, but what if we can find 50 righteous people, and then going down and that whole back and forth bargaining thing, you feel like God entertained Abraham's sort of considerations or the thoughts, but that ultimately God never again was willing to enter into that like engaging conversation about God's actions, or really?
Yeah. Well, there's a verse. So one of the the mysteries of the parsha, because you have in the same parsha there's the binding of Isaac, right? And the Sodom and Gomorrah piece comes first. So people are always, well, why does Abraham argue so much for these people? He doesn't even know them. And then God says to him, take your son. And he says nothing, Abraham. Like, why?
Yeah.
And in my mind, the answer to that question has always been the last verse in the Sodom and Gomorrah piece, which is, I don't remember, it's after the argument between God and Abraham, and God basically says, I'm going to go do what I need to do. And then it says something like, if you have the Hebrew, it says something like, and Abraham returned to his makom. Like,
yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
What does it say?
It says, Ka'asher kila v'daber el Abraham, ve'Abraham shav limukomo.
Okay, so that God finished speaking. It's very like, God, I'm done. God finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. And I've understood the use of makom there as sort of a metaphor, like not a physical place, but a status place. And so that Abraham, that's, Abraham's back to being like a normal person. God's not going to consult with him anymore. God's off to doing God things, and never the twain shall meet.
It's so interesting to me. It's so interesting to me. I sort of felt like there was, by the way, just for those who are listening, what ends up happening, spoiler alert, is that that Abraham tries to convince God not to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right.
Which, just juxtaposing to when we did Noach together, that Noach actually doesn't enter into that sort of confrontation or that conversation with God. God says to Noach, I'm going to destroy the communities, I'm going to destroy the world. And Noach's like, okay, good. Me and my family are safe. We're in. Right. It closes the door. And here Abraham is sort of saying, I think in some ways, like, how could you, it's such a beautiful and powerful idea. Like, how could you, God, like a just God, how could you destroy the entire like communities when there will inevitably be righteous people among the evil, right? Like it's such an interesting thing. And then God says basically, if you can find me those righteous ones,
right,
then you're right. I'll
right,
spare the community.
right,
And then ultimately they get down to 10 and Abraham can't find 10 righteous ones.
right.
And so then what I love about this is that then you sort of have to ask in your mind, sort of as we did with the Noah story, like, what could the people of Sodom and Gomorrah have been doing that was so bad that God wanted to, even after that Noah, when God's like, hey, I'll send you the rainbow, I'm not going to do this again. But then now we see God about to destroy not the entire world, but two different communities. And we sort of zoom in. Like if I were a producer, we like zoom in to the people in Sodom, which
Right.
is where Lot, ended up settling, where we read last week.
Yeah.
And the people of Sodom, we see that Lot is hanging out, Abraham's nephew in the, public sphere. These two angels show up. Lot does exactly what Abraham does. And it's like, hey, come back to my home for dinner. I'd love to host you. I'll cook for you. We'll cook for you. We'll give you water. You can have a place to rest, something to. And then all of a sudden, you see all of the townspeople of Lot, like old and young alike, like knocking on the door of Lot's house saying, hey, those two guests, the ones that like actually were sort of reluctant about coming back to your house anyway, we want them. We want to be intimate with them.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you're like, what? And then it gets even weirder when you want a ticket.
Well, I don't know which part you're referring to.
The daughters.
Yeah, and he substitutes his daughters, although in the end, the people are the attacking people. It's like zombies, kind of. It's like it's always sort of like a zombie movie to me. The zombie people are sort of struck blind, and then the daughters are seemingly spared at the last minute, right? But it's the whole thing is bizarre. Like it's a very bizarre story. And I'm not really 100% sure the purpose of it. Maybe the sense that like the problems of Noah's time, which were the problems of Cain and Abel's time, like it's always going to be a problem. I think the Bible is sensitive to that. Human beings have a propensity for violence. And so maybe it's about that, I'm not sure. And then, maybe interesting to compare Lot and Abraham and Lot, and both sort of portrayed as, at least on the surface, seemingly righteous. Like Lot was the righteous person there, and yet when you read into the story, he had clearly fallen, from grace, so to speak, and maybe that when taken in contradistinction with Abraham's character and the argument for justice and all that kind of stuff, maybe it makes Abraham look even greater. I don't know. What's your take on it?
I think for me, sort of having that moment where we zoom in to the community of Sodom and Gomorrah, that it feels like, I don't know, it makes me feel like I have a better understanding of how a people and a community could go awry.
Yeah.
So what they say to Lot is like, who are you to tell us what to do? Basically, you're a stranger here.
Yeah.
Right. It seems like it's like the culture or the spirit, of that community to behave that way. And it almost makes me think that, like, in many ways we sort of rise and we fall together.
Yeah.
Behaviors actually are contagious. And the people that we surround ourselves with actually, I believe, really that matters. We influence one another for sure. I don't know if it, holds, I think that probably holds with our in-person relationships as well as our social media relationships, like our online relationships. But I think they're, sort of having that glimpse it feels like an important moment just to see how bad people have become again and why God is tempted to destroy the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. And then I also think it's really interesting to me just to think about, like, sort of how Lot has also gone awry. as you said, he's so worried about being a good host to the two guests slash men slash angels who are, spending the night in his home.
Right.
But he is like more than fine to send his girls, out to be sacrificed tonight. I feel like for me, sometimes that's like a good momentary reminder of, to different degrees, but I think sometimes we do tend to maybe privilege or, give our best to people that are, in our workplace or in our community, and like at the end of the day, sort of have the dregs left for the people that really matter most.
Right.
So I feel it's like, in some ways, also just a moment where you're like, oh, do I have my own sort of house in order in terms of the care that I give?
Yeah. I mean, that's another way to, sort of parse out the Abraham split personality in the parsha with, this like magnificent stand for justice.
Yeah.
And then like really sort of failing miserably in the home.
Mm.
People who are, so I think there's something to that. It's also, like justice is hard to find, and there's an incredible line. I don't remember exactly the Hebrew, but what is it? Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat, right? The judge of the whole earth is not going to do justice. Like, you can't find justice with God. You can't find justice here on earth. Like, where do you find it? I mean, so.
You know what's so interesting about that? And we actually have this on our building outside, right? There's a nod to a midrash that comes from the beginning of Genesis, from Rabbi. And it says that, like, and it gets to your earlier comment, that when God was creating the world, God informed the angels that God was about to create human beings.
Right.
And the angels were like split into coalitions. And half of the angels were like, great. And the other half were like, no, don't do it,
Right.
And as they were sort of in their coalitions fighting back and forth about the merits of creating human beings and the challenges or possible detriment of creating human beings, God takes truth and sends it to the earth, right? Yeah. And crashes it down. And I've like never fully understood that. Why do you need truth? Like, what does that mean to not be able to keep truth, either up in the heavens or maybe on earth? Like, I don't know. I just feel like there's this weird thing happening with truth today.
Well, for sure.
And so why truth? What? I don't know. There's like something that I haven't been able to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, it's that and getting back to that whole struggle that God has in trying to figure out how to be in relationship with human beings through particularly the earlier parts of the Torah, these Genesis stories. Maybe it's this way of symbolically recognizing that if human beings are going to be in the world by definition will then be imperfect. That's it. So human beings can't stay in the Garden of Eden. That's not going to work because that's a perfect place. Human beings are imperfect, proven by the story, right? And then send them out into the world. But as soon as you do that, the world will always be imperfect. And something like truth, which is understood as, in one way at least, as representing some sense of perfection. It's true, right? But no, like it's you won't be able to fully find it. You won't be able to fully find it. Like maybe justice. We're getting our strict minder, as we have a meeting that started 2 minutes ago that we're supposed to be at. All right, Rabbi Saroken, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for listening to us, and hope you enjoyed.